What if I told you that the most selfless thing God could possibly do is be um, entirely obsessed with himself?
Yeah, I mean, that sounds completely backward to our modern sensibilities,
Oh, it
doesn't it?
really does. But
Yeah.
welcome to Reformed Thinking. And
Yeah.
if you are listening right now, you are sitting right here in the room with us.
You're the silent third participant in this conversation.
Yeah, we are speaking directly to you today. And the mission of this deep dive is to unpack Jonathan Edwards's massive theological dissertation concerning the single final reason God created the world.
Which is, a huge topic. And if you know our framework here, we look at theology through the lens of historic Protestantism.
Right, specifically holding to the Westminster Confession of Faith. That theological lens is really going to guide how we read Edwards today.
It has to. Because we are looking at an 18th century genius trying to map out the sheer mechanics of eternity.
And the text we have in front of us is incredibly dense. Okay, let's unpack this. Edwards makes a staggering claim right out of the gate.
He really does.
He argues that God's final aim in creation is not a collection of different goals.
Right.
It is not manifold.
Right. He says it is entirely singular.
Yeah. But, we look at Scripture and we see various names for God's aims. Sometimes the text speaks of his love or his justice or his mercy or his wrath.
And I think we tend to view those as like different modes God slips into depending on the situation.
Spot on.
Huh.
But Edwards insists these are all distinct labels for one single unified whole.
And that whole is the glory of God.
Right.
It is a massive paradigm shift. And we really have to understand why this matters so much for Protestant theology, specifically within the confessional tradition we operate in.
Yeah, let's look at the Westminster Shorter Catechism.
Exactly. The very first question asks, what is the chief end of man?
And the answer provided by the Westminster Divines is that man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever.
Right. So what Jonathan Edwards is doing in this dissertation is taking that precise question and applying it to the Creator.
Which is pretty bold.
Very bold. He is demonstrating that God's chief end, his supreme goal in all of creation, is the precise same thing as our chief end.
Wow. So God's supreme goal is to glorify God.
Yes. Because for centuries, you had theologians trying to list out the various reasons God might have created the universe.
They would sort of compartmentalize his motives.
Right. They would argue that he created the world to display his justice in one specific event, to display his grace in another event.
Or maybe to provide a habitation for humanity over in a completely different category.
Yeah. But Edwards looks at that fragmented theological method and says it fundamentally misunderstands the nature of the divine mind.
Those are not competing interests then.
Not at all. They are not separate items on a cosmic checklist. They are entirely subsumed under the single heading of his glory.
So it operates as a unifying theory of creation.
Yes, a unifying theory.
I see where he's going with a unifying theory, but it raises a massive logical hurdle right away for me.
How so?
Well, how can different concepts in the Bible, like love, knowledge, and holiness, all be reduced to just one thing?
That is the big question.
Because in our human experience, those are entirely different categories. Knowing a fact about mathematics is very different from loving your spouse.
Right, they feel completely distinct.
Yeah, and both of those are different from possessing moral perfection. Collapsing them feels like we are, flattening the definitions of words until they lose their meaning.
I get that. It feels counterintuitive.
To try and visualize what Edwards is doing, I think about looking at a single, masterfully cut diamond.
Oh, a diamond. Okay.
Yeah, imagine you hold a diamond up to the light. You see dozens of different facets, right?
Right.
One facet flashes blue, another flashes brilliant white, another catches a hint of red.
Yeah.
And if you only look at the reflections hitting the wall of the room, you might think you are dealing with many different light sources or many different colored stones.
But you are looking at entirely one single stone.
Exactly. The variety is in the expression, not in the essence.
I see.
So Edwards seems to be arguing that the manifold goals of God we see in Scripture are just the various facets of this single diamond called his glory.
The diamond analogy works to a certain point in visualizing the single source of multiple reflections.
What?
But we have to push back on it slightly to stay true to Edwards's philosophy.
Okay, fair enough. Where does it break down?
Well, a diamond is a passive object. It requires an external light source to shine.
Oh, right. If you put a diamond in a dark room, it produces nothing.
Exactly. And God, in Edwards's framework, is not a passive gem waiting for illumination. He is the light itself.
That makes a lot of sense.
This is why Edwards has to define what that singular aim actually means in practice. He is attempting to define the indefinable.
And how does he do that?
He does this by making a critical distinction between God's internal glory and his external glory.
Okay, internal versus external.
Yeah, Edwards defines the glory of God as the emanation and true external expression of God's internal glory and fullness.
That word emanation is doing a lot of heavy lifting there.
It really is. It means God exercising his perfections to produce a proper effect.
Rather than those perfections lying eternally dormant and ineffectual.
Yes. God has inherent fullness. He is complete within himself.
But the external existence of that fullness, like the flowing outward of it, is what we call his glory in creation.
What's fascinating here is how Edwards readily admits that human language is inadequate for such sublime concepts.
He does.
Yeah, he acknowledges a degree of obscurity in his own definitions.
I mean, he is a finite creature trying to find finite syllables to describe an infinite, eternal reality.
Spot on. So the word emanation is the best he can do to describe a God who is both entirely self-contained and yet constantly overflowing.
That distinction between internal fullness and external emanation creates a massive intellectual challenge, though.
How do you mean?
Well, Edwards says that God's internal glory must produce a proper effect in opposition to lying eternally dormant.
Right.
But if God is perfectly self-sufficient, doesn't the idea of his attributes needing to produce an effect imply that he lacks something?
That is a very common objection.
I mean, if he must emanate to express his glory, does that mean he was somehow incomplete before the universe existed?
It sounds like it on the surface.
Think about a master musician. A master pianist who sits in an empty room and never actually plays an instrument is still a master, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Their skill and genius are fully intact internally. They do not require an audience to validate their mastery.
No, they don't.
Nor do they even need a piano to possess the knowledge of music. So why must God's attributes not remain dormant?
That is a great question.
Why is it a requirement for his internal glory to have this external expression if he truly needs nothing outside of himself?
Well, Edwards anticipates this exact philosophical pushback.
I figured he might.
And his answer requires us to completely rethink our definition of necessity.
Okay, how so?
When we say someone needs something, we usually mean they have a deficit.
Right, a starving person needs food because they lack calories.
Yes. Or a lonely person needs companionship because they lack connection. But God does not create out of a deficit.
He creates out of an overflowing abundance.
Exactly. Your musician analogy is helpful if we adjust the motive a bit.
Adjusted how?
It is not that the musician needs an audience to validate their skill.
Okay.
It is that the music inside them is so abundant, so overwhelming, that it naturally bursts forth into performance.
Oh, wow. I like that.
The effect, which is the creation of the world, is a communication of fullness, not a grasping for something missing.
So if God's perfections remained entirely internal, they would be, in Edwards's words, ineffectual.
Yes. Think of a fountain.
Okay, a fountain.
A fountain that never flows is still a reservoir, but it is the very nature of a fountain to bubble over.
Because there is so much water, it cannot be contained.
Right. God's emanation is the supreme expression of his self-sufficiency.
Because he lacks nothing. He has everything to give.
Exactly. The creation is simply the splashing over of his infinite internal satisfaction.
If the creation is the splashing over of his internal satisfaction, we have to look at what specifically is in that water.
Yeah, we really do.
What is the anatomy of this glory?
Yeah.
Edwards gets incredibly granular here.
He loves to break things down.
He categorizes God's internal fullness into two primary faculties: understanding and will.
Understanding representing his infinite knowledge.
Yes, and will, representing his infinite virtue, holiness, and joy.
Right.
He then makes a striking philosophical move that feels incredibly bold.
What does he do?
He reduces all other divine attributes to mere modifiers of these two core aspects.
Oh, right. The reduction.
Yeah. For example, he argues that God's eternity is not a distinct, separate attribute sitting on a shelf next to his knowledge.
Eternity is simply the duration of this goodness.
Precisely. Immutability is not a separate thing. It is the goodness with a negation of chance or change.
And strength is just the degree of these things in relation to effects.
Everything boils down to understanding and will.
This reduction to understanding and will is a massive theological insight.
It really simplifies things.
It does. And it draws heavily from the philosophical context of his era, specifically the works of John Locke.
Locke, really.
Yeah, whom Edwards read as a young teenager. Locke categorized the human mind into understanding and will.
Oh, I see the connection now.
And Edwards took that framework and elevated it to the divine level.
Arguing that human beings possess these faculties precisely because we are made in the image of God.
Yes, a God who is fundamentally understanding and will. It simplifies the infinite without diminishing it.
That is a great way to put it.
And Edwards grounds this philosophical framework directly in Scripture. He points to the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 14.
Remind us what that says.
That verse describes Christ, the Word made flesh, as being full of grace and truth.
Ah, grace and truth.
Right. Edwards maps his two faculties perfectly onto this verse.
So truth corresponds to the understanding, which is infinite knowledge.
Yes. And grace corresponds to the will, which encompasses holiness and happiness.
Wow. So when the apostles beheld the glory of the only begotten of the Father,
What they were witnessing was the supreme emanation of God's understanding and God's will standing right in front of them in physical form.
the abstract concepts take on a vivid historical reality in the incarnation of Jesus.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener?
It is a fair question.
Let's ground this high theology in what it actually accomplishes for the creature.
Yes. Let's bring it down to earth.
By communicating his understanding, God gives the creature knowledge of himself. He gives us truth.
Right.
By communicating his will, God gives the creature love and joy in himself. He gives us grace.
It is a direct transfer.
Every piece of spiritual knowledge you possess, every ounce of genuine holy affection you feel, is a direct communication of God's internal faculties into your finite being.
It really changes how you view your own thoughts and feelings.
It does.
Yeah.
And to make these abstract faculties concrete, we have to look at the primary physical illustration Edwards uses in the text.
Which is a brilliant illustration.
He moves away from philosophical definitions and leans into the physical sciences of his day.
Yeah, he was quite the science buff.
He compares God's glory to an effulgence or emanation of light from a great luminary, specifically the sun.
The sun analogy is the absolute centerpiece of his entire argument.
Light is the external expression of the sun's internal excellence.
Edwards lived in a post-Newtonian world, you know. He was fascinated by optics and the physics of light.
Viewing the physical universe as a scale model of spiritual realities.
Exactly. Through this emanating light, the sun itself is seen.
Because you cannot look at the internal core of the sun.
Right, the internal fusion happening there is inaccessible to you. But you know the sun through the light and heat that reach you across the vacuum of space.
Furthermore, surrounding objects receive all their luster, beauty, and brightness from this participation in the sun's communication.
And in Scripture, light is abundantly used to represent the three things we have been talking about.
Knowledge, holiness, and happiness.
Yes, without the sun's emanation, the solar system is dark, cold, and dead.
With the emanation, there is visibility, warmth, and life.
God's internal glory is the nuclear furnace of the sun, and the creation is the solar system basking in its rays.
Let's expand on that sun analogy so you can really picture the mechanics of what Edwards is arguing.
Okay, let's do it.
Think of a completely dark room full of objects. Maybe there's a chair, a painting on the wall, and a bookshelf.
Got it.
In absolute darkness, those objects possess no visible color or beauty. They are entirely indiscernible.
You cannot see a thing.
The painting is entirely reliant on an outside source to be seen.
Right.
When a light source is introduced, the objects suddenly appear brilliant. You can see the red in the painting, the grain of the wood on the bookshelf.
But the objects themselves did not generate that brilliance.
No, they didn't. They are simply catching and returning the light from the source.
Which is such a helpful way to think about us.
Our human goodness, our knowledge, our joy, these possess no inherent luminescence.
They are entirely dependent on reflecting the great luminary.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Edwards writes that it is by this light that all nature receives life, comfort, and joy.
We are completely contingent beings.
Yes, our brightest moments of spiritual joy are just photons from the divine sun bouncing off our finite souls.
That visual of the dark room is highly accurate to Edwards' premise.
It helps make it concrete.
But it forces us to look at the dynamic between the source and the receiver.
How so?
If creatures are merely reflecting light back to the source, what does the cyclical relationship look like?
Oh, I see.
Edwards introduces a concept we can call the divine loop. He states in the text, the water in the stream is something of the fountain, and the beams of the sun are something of the sun.
In the creature knowing, loving, and rejoicing in God, the glory of God is both exhibited and acknowledged.
Yes, his fullness is received by the creature and then returned to him.
This is the emanation and the re-emanation.
A critical phrase from the text captures this perfectly. The whole is of God and in God and to God, and he is the beginning and the middle and the end.
That is the very essence of Reformed theology.
God is the active, initiating, and sustaining agent in all phases of the creature's spiritual life.
Nothing originates with us.
No, we do not generate the light. We do not generate the heat. We receive and return.
That total reliance on God as the active agent brings up a massive question about human agency, though.
It is the next logical step to wonder about that.
If the beams just refund back to the sun, are humans just passive mirrors?
That is the fear, isn't it?
Yeah, because a mirror has no feelings. It has no will. It just sits there on the wall while light bounces off it.
Right.
If God is the beginning, middle, and end of the whole process, how does the text maintain the creature's active joy?
It is a tension for sure.
If I am rejoicing in God, it feels like I am the one doing the rejoicing. It feels active and personal.
You are experiencing the emotion in your chest.
I am making the choice to sing or to pray. So how do we reconcile our very real active experience of love and joy with the claim that God is the source of the entirety of it?
It is a stunning theological tension, and it strikes at the heart of how Edwards viewed the human will.
How does he resolve it?
He handles this by explaining that God does not just bounce light off us the way light bounces off a piece of glass.
Okay.
He communicates his nature into our faculties.
Oh, into the faculties of understanding and will that we talked about.
Yes. When God communicates his understanding to you, your mind is genuinely active in knowing him.
And when he communicates his will to you, your heart is genuinely active in loving him.
Precisely. You are not a mirror. You are a living soul. The joy you feel is genuinely your joy, but the substance of that joy is God himself.
You're actively participating in the divine nature.
The fact that God supplies the fullness does not negate your experience of it. Rather, it makes your experience possible.
Your active rejoicing is the very mechanism of the re-emanation.
Think of it like lungs breathing oxygen.
Okay, lung.
The lungs are actively expanding and contracting, performing the work of respiration, but the oxygen itself comes from the atmosphere.
Right. Without the atmosphere, the lungs can pump all they want, but they will suffocate.
Exactly. Your soul is actively rejoicing, but the oxygen of that joy is the emanation of God's glory.
This realization that God is doing all of this for his own glory and that he is the source and the goal of everything.
Yeah.
It always hits a wall when it comes into contact with modern sensibilities.
Oh, absolutely.
It brings up an objection regarding selfishness.
Right, the cosmic narcissist idea.
Yeah. If God's supreme goal is his own glory, doesn't that make him a cosmic narcissist? People think that if God is seeking his own end, it implies a disregard for the creature.
Edwards anticipates this exact objection.
He argues that God's respect for himself and his respect for the creature are not a double and divided respect.
That phrase is so crucial. Double and divided respect.
Because God infinitely values his own glorious perfections, he naturally values the image or participation of those perfections that exist in the creature.
Yes. God approves of others' esteem of himself for the exact same reason he esteems himself.
Because he is objectively the highest good.
We have to fundamentally adjust our categories here because we project our human flaws onto the divine nature.
We do that all the time.
In human terms, if a person seeks their own glory above all else, we call them selfish.
Because a human being exalting themselves comes at the expense of others.
Right. A human is taking something that does not belong to them, elevating their finite, flawed self over other finite, flawed selves.
But God is the ontological source of all goodness.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this logic shatters the modern assumption that doing something for oneself automatically harms others.
For God to desire the greatest possible good is for him to desire himself.
Because there is no higher good available.
Therefore, when God seeks his own glory, he is simultaneously seeking the greatest possible good for the creature.
Because the creature's highest good is to be united with God's glory.
His self-regard is the very thing that guarantees the creature's ultimate happiness.
It is not a zero-sum game where God gets glory and you get diminished.
I want to make that abstract concept a bit more tangible for you.
Good idea.
Consider a family dynamic, which Edwards briefly touches on in his writings.
Okay.
Imagine a loving parent whose absolute greatest joy is watching their child open a magnificent gift on Christmas morning.
I can picture that.
The parent bought the gift, the parent wrapped the gift, and the parent planned the surprise.
Lots of preparation.
When the child tears off the paper and erupts in happiness, the parent is filled with joy.
Right.
Now, is the parent being selfish by seeking their own joy in that moment?
Of course not.
The parent's joy and the child's joy are entirely overlapping. Seeking the child's happiness is the specific way the parent seeks their own joy.
The two respects are not divided.
When God seeks your joy in Him, He is seeking His own glory, and the two are perfectly unified.
The parent analogy helps illustrate the overlapping joy, but we have to recognize where it falls short of the divine reality.
Oh, sure. All analogies break down eventually.
A human parent and a human child are two entirely separate beings. The parent gives a physical gift that is separate from both of them.
Whereas in Edwards' theology, God is not just the giver of the gift, He is the gift itself.
Yes, he's the environment in which the creature exists.
Once we understand that this union between God's glory and the creature's happiness is the goal, we have to ask how this union unfolds over the span of eternity.
Right. Edwards argues that the creature's happiness consists entirely of union with God.
The greater the happiness, the greater the union.
And because this happiness will increase to eternity, the union will become constantly more strict and perfect.
Edwards, who had a highly analytical mind, uses a mathematical analogy to illustrate this.
The infinite height analogy.
He asks us to picture something ascending constantly toward an infinite height with a given velocity.
Okay.
God views this eternally increasing progression as an infinite whole, making it His supreme aim, even though a point in time will never arrive where it is finished or capped off.
It is an asymptotic relationship.
The line gets closer and closer to the axis forever, without ever touching it. I have to admit, when I read that mathematical analogy of ascending toward an infinite height forever,
Yeah.
I had an immediate, very human reaction. Doesn't that sound exhausting?
Exhausting. That makes sense.
The idea of a constant striving that never actually hits the ceiling feels like a recipe for fatigue.
It does sound like a lot of work.
In our daily lives, we value rest. We value completing a task, crossing the finish line, and sitting down.
The concept of moving upwards with a given velocity for all eternity, never arriving at a state of absolute completion.
It sounds contrary to our typical view of heavenly rest.
Right.
If I'm always moving, always growing, always ascending, how do we square this infinite mathematical progression with the biblical promise of peace?
It sounds like spiritual cardio that never ends. It sounds exhausting only because we associate progression with physical limits and finite energy.
That is true.
In our current state, exertion depletes our reserves. We run a mile, we burn calories, our muscles tear, and we need sleep to recover.
But Edwards is not describing a frustrating, sweaty striving against gravity.
No, he is describing an accelerating capacity for joy in a glorified state where exhaustion does not exist.
Think of it not as climbing a mountain that never ends, but as your heart expanding to hold more light.
As the creature grows in union with God, their capacity to hold God's joy expands.
God fills that expanded capacity, which stretches the creature further, allowing them to receive even more.
It is an infinitely scaling geometry of happiness.
You are at perfect rest, meaning you have no anxiety, no sin, no friction.
Yet your experience of that rest gets dynamically richer every single moment forever.
Your knowledge of God deepens, which increases your love for Him, which increases your joy, which expands your capacity to know Him more.
It is an eternal feedback loop of increasing velocity.
To prove this concept of an ongoing eternal action, Edwards draws a striking parallel to another eternal doctrine.
One that requires very careful theological handling.
Yes, very careful. He compares the infinite progression of union with God to the concept of satisfying justice in eternal damnation.
Which is a heavy topic.
Edwards points out that justice is satisfied by damnation considered only in its eternal duration.
There is never a single moment in the future where justice is completely paid up.
Because the offense is against an infinitely holy being, the payment requires an infinite amount of time for a finite creature to endure.
He uses this incredibly dark, heavy reality to illustrate the brilliant mechanics of his point about glory. He draws that parallel because he wants to explain the mechanics of grace.
God aims to satisfy His infinite grace by bestowing an infinitely valuable good, which is eternal felicity upon the saints.
Just as there is no point where justice is completely paid by a finite creature in hell, there will never come a single moment when God says, "I have now finished bestowing grace upon my people."
The bestowal of infinite grace requires an ongoing eternity.
This raises an important question regarding how believers view eternity today.
We often default to a static view of heaven.
Yes, we picture it as a place where you receive a lump sum of grace upon entry at the pearly gates, and then nothing ever changes.
You just sit on a cloud and play a harp.
Edwards shatters that static, boring view. Heaven is an active, ongoing, never-ending communication of God's internal fullness into your expanding soul.
You can feel Edwards's brilliant rhetorical edge in this section, too.
Oh, for sure.
He makes a sharp aside, aimed at the modern freethinkers of his day who dislike the doctrine of infinite punishment.
It is fascinating to see that the theological debates happening in the mid-18th century mirror our own today.
The deists and the Enlightenment thinkers of his era were uncomfortable with eternal duration, just as people are now.
But Edwards forces them to be intellectually consistent.
If you reject the eternal ongoing nature of justice, you logically have to reject the eternal ongoing nature of grace.
You cannot have an eternally increasing union with God if you demand that eternal processes must have a completion date.
The architecture of eternity requires ongoing duration in both directions.
That demand for consistency is the hallmark of Edwards's mind.
He refuses to let the reader isolate doctrines.
You cannot pick and choose which parts of the divine nature you want to engage with. Everything is connected by this single unifying thread of God's glory.
Whether he is discussing the mechanics of the will, the physics of light, the dynamics of human affection,
Or the stark realities of eternal justice, he always traces the logic back to that one fountain.
God is the beginning, the middle, and the end.
His glory is the singular reason the universe exists, and everything we observe or experience is simply the emanation of that internal divine fullness.
Bringing this massive cosmic scale of eternal progression down to your daily reality is essential as we wrap up this deep dive.
Yes, let's pull it all together.
Let's synthesize the sheer volume of theology we have covered. Jonathan Edwards has meticulously demonstrated that God's pursuit of his own glory and your personal pursuit of true happiness are not competing interests.
They are the exact same pursuit.
You do not have to choose between glorifying God and finding joy,
Why should you care about this dense 18th century philosophy?
because it frees you from the guilt of desiring joy.
It gives you permission to seek happiness voraciously, provided that your happiness is found in God's fullness.
You are designed to be a receiver of the divine emanation. You are the dark room, and he is the great luminary.
That freedom is the practical payoff of this high theology.
When you understand that God's internal fullness is meant to flow outward into you, it changes how you approach worship
It changes how you process suffering.
and how you live your daily life.
You realize that your highest moments of joy are not distractions from God, they are direct participations in His nature.
Your joy is the re-emanation of his glory back to him. We want to leave you with a final, lingering question to mull over as you go about your day.
Something to keep you thinking.
It builds on Edwards' text, but pushes past what we just discussed. If your eternal state is going to be one of constant, accelerating increase in knowledge, holiness, and joy,
This eternal calculus of expanding capacity.
how does that alter your view of a restful afterlife?
Could heaven be an infinitely more dynamic, mentally active, and thrilling state of constant discovery than you ever imagined?
We hope this deep dive has given you a massive theological framework to chew on.
Keep reading, keep asking hard questions, and keep your mind engaged.
Goodbye for now.
Take